Welcome back to the Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. I'm your host, Wayne Lua. Continue to be joined by co-host Blake Murphy, and we are joined in the studio, the man himself, 3-point Grange, Michael Grange. What's going on?
R.I.P. 3-point Grange.
You still got the three at least.
Yeah, at least.
Well, now it's words by Grange, right?
No,
It's
it's
more
words by
video
Grange.
essay oriented than.
Am I on TV right now?
Yeah, you're on Sportsnet 360 and
All right.
the Sportsnet Plus app.
There we go.
Well, Grange is like, I'm on the broadcast, so is this the same
No,
equivalent?
I just wanted to be sure. And thank you
Okay.
for your kind welcome. Thanks for having me on. And
Yeah.
How you feeling, man?
I'm
Opening
feeling-
day.
Yeah, no, opening night. I think.
Yeah,
we
sure.
went over this morning on the morning show. Yeah, I think in basketball it is opening night.
Yeah, we're gonna live producing. We're gonna ask Grange to go a little bit closer to the mic.
Yeah, see, I was going to say that.
There you go. Well, Grange, you wrote an excellent piece, and I know you've been hard at work at this. Waiting long extra hours at OVO practice facility on a Sunday, no less. I was there. I saw you and I were the last two guys there, and I know you had a lot more time to log in that room, and you were working on this piece, which was really great. You do a lot of big reads, but especially usually you do one at the start of the year, and this one you chose to talk about Darko Rajaković and his upbringing. It's really insightful. There's lots of details. Honestly, you're learning a lot about Serbia in this piece.
Yeah.
which is really good because the piece is entitled Passion, Empathy, and Enat. So let's start with that word right there, Enat. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, it's awesome. I kind of stumbled into that, and it was one of those. It's almost like a code in Serbian culture.
Okay.
And if there are people with Serbian backgrounds listening, please, if I get it wrong, don't be too upset. But I mentioned it to Darko when I was speaking with him, and he kind of like, yes, he kind of really jumped on it, and it's one of those words where in our language there's not a direct equivalent, and it kind of is also, I think, in their culture multi-purpose. Like it has it does a lot of work. But I think in general, and I think I said in the piece, it's like it just speaks to almost like a stubbornness, an obstinance, a determination of a culture, just to like, oh yeah, you don't think I can do this? I'm going to show you.
Mm-hmm.
And I said in the piece, it's like hardwired into the Serbian DNA, like to give like a collective middle finger to the haters. You know what I mean? Like that's just something within them. And we talked about his background. So we can leave it there. I'm sure you got a lot of questions, but that's what Enat means. Is that's my understanding. Is there's just a steeliness to the way they go about their everyday in a cultural sense and almost an expectation. And, a very simple example that Darko mentioned me would be Serbia at the World Cup this past summer. And, they didn't have their guys. They had almost none of their guys.
Yeah.
And they were an awesome team in that tournament and easily could have won it. And, they went there, we're going to do it despite what you think. And that's kind of something that's, very close to the heart in Serbian culture.
So obviously a huge part of Serbian culture is the basketball culture there, right? And something I found really interesting in the piece is, yes, basketball is enormous in Serbia relative to the size of the population there and in Slovenia and Montenegro and other places. The basketball success and the basketball culture is so much larger than the population number might suggest. Yet we are, despite seeing Serbian MVP, Serbia on the national stage, this culture, hearing the story of how, like, even before you're allowed to actually coach basketball, all the courses you have to take, and then you got to prove yourself with the little kids. Like, there is a lot that goes into it, and there's a lot of thoughtfulness and a lot of intention in addition to the passion with Serbian basketball. Yet here we are where Darko Rajaković is only the second European head coach to get an opportunity in the NBA. In reporting this out and talking to Patrick Engelbrecht and Darko Rajaković, why do you think that is? Why do you think that with all this globalization of the game from a marketing perspective and from an on-court perspective, there's been a lag on the coaching side?
A super simple and oversimplification might be 29 out of 30 NBA teams, maybe 28 out of 30 NBA teams owned by Americans. You know what I mean? Like, and it's just, such an omnipresent factor in the NBA. And yes, it's a global sport. And yes, I was talking with people today, like, who's going to be the next American MVP? Like, because we can list 8 or 9 guys who aren't American who have won it or could win it, and might win it before you get to, it's Jason Tatum and then who,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And so, so it's like, but even in that context, and this, we all know this has been going on now for 20 plus years, it's still, an American-based league run mostly by Americans, populated mostly by Americans. And I just think that there's been a hesitation to look far outside of that. And, and I think what was interesting about it is Igor Kokashev, who was, he was the Serbian. He's a friend of Darko's, a little bit older, and had a little bit broader resume in terms of international coaching experience when he got the job with the Suns. And that was a disaster. It wasn't, I don't think, Igor's fault.
Yep.
It was just 2018-19, they won 19 games, and it was a tire fire. And we all know, we've kind of read and heard all the stories about what went on there again. But what's sort of interesting is that, you would have thought that the next European head coach would have been the guys even we're familiar with, the Ettore Messinas, the, Sergio Scariolos, and you kind of, there's a handful of guys that have been so prominent, either international basketball or in EuroLeague, for example. You go, yeah, okay, one of these guys will give him a crack. Darko's not that. And I think, so the reason to your question, Blake, is I just think that there's been, I don't want to say a prejudice, I just think a hesitancy. And what's interesting about this guy, this choice to bring it through, to break through, and even talking to Patrick Engelbrecht, the Raptors head of global scouting, is even in Europe, they're kind of going, he wasn't at the top of anyone's list there because of his, again, he doesn't have some of those, he hasn't crossed some of those hurdles of, to get that stamp, either leading the Serbian national team or, coaching another national team or coaching at the highest level of EuroLeague. But, that said, like, there's a lot of interest in seeing if this guy can do it, and maybe then it'll widen the pool going forward.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's always the risk you run in sports, right? You sort of stay within sort of everyone's expectations. You stay with what's comfortable. If it doesn't work out, it's the fault of, that player or that situation or that coach, whatever. You go out of the lane like this and you bring someone in that you sort of change sort of the pattern of the flow. Then all of a sudden people look at you like you either are an innovator and it really worked, or what are you doing, right? And I think that in the case of Igor, I mean, I even remember interviewing let's just say an unnamed Suns player, a veteran Suns player who has been around the league a long time. And I was like, pregame, I was like, hey, I want to talk to you about this story. Do you want to talk pregame or postgame? And he's like, let's talk now. And I was like, it's probably going to be like a 15, 20-minute thing. Are you sure? And he's like, no, don't worry, man. We're not going to prepare for this game. And I was like, oh, Lord. And that game, that season you mentioned, they won 19 games. And we had a great chat. It turned into a great story. But yeah, like that, he struggled in that case. But I think in the situation with Darko that's really unique is, I think the perception for a lot of European coaches when they come over is like, they run super long practices. They're hard on the players, right? There's a different culture in terms of how coaches approach coaching in Europe versus how coaching is approached here. I think the thing with Darko to be really cognizant of is the fact that his coaching career in the States is dating back at least a decade now. And he has that ability to connect with players. So I think that's where when people get a little concerned about the stereotypes of the European coach, Darko is not one of those guys. He's not going to run like these 7-hour practices, which are apparently actually taking place sometime even now.
They've only been 3 hours so far training camp.
Yeah,
But no, I mean, I think that's a good observation, and I know that was important, right? Like they weren't going to bring a guy in who's got no exposure to the NBA culture. It is, like you can't swim. You can only swim upstream so much. And I think what's interesting too about Darko, and just talking to various people, it's funny. I talked to Andy Routens, who played for Darko in Tulsa in 2012. So it was Andy's only year in the G League. Darko's first year coaching as a head coach in North America, and Andy said to me, he goes, "Man, I was worried as a Serbian head coach. I go, this might be bad." And he said, and the one thing you run into when you do talk to people who've worked with or around or for Darko is like people really gush, like they love the guy. And Andy was like unreserved, and there's a guy who's played all over the world, he says it's one of his favorite years he's ever had in basketball. And, and I think the one point I'm kind of getting to is, as much as we make a big deal about, his formal education as a coach and why does Serbia and some of the other Baltic nations have such an outsized influence based on their population? It's because they're very, like you said, very intentional about how they study, approach, break down, and teach the game. That's very important. There's a lot of expertise, but at the end, at the highest level, and Billy Donovan made this point to me too. Is look, I can talk to someone for a couple hours, and I know if they got it or not. Like
right.
X's and O's wise, like
Right.
at the end, like we're all experts as you would expect at this level. But what really allows you to thrive and in some cases survive is your ability to relate, connect,
Yes.
build bridges, and those kinds of things. And that's where I think Darko really. That's really what was I think the difference in him getting this job. And then the next question is going to be, it's one thing as an assistant coach to build those relationships. As a head coach, sometimes, you got to be a bad guy, and that's going to be an interesting test for him. But, there are different ways to do it.
You got him not being a bad guy, but he has cut straight to the point.
To Malachi?
To Malachi,
Yeah.
right? Because I think you described in this scenario, I think it was training camp, Malachi had just flown in or something like that. I don't know. And he like really struggled or something.
It was his first day of open gym.
Okay,
And
yeah,
Malachi
right.
had flown I don't know if he was on the red eye or what, but he got
Right,
in really late. So,
Okay.
it wasn't like he's been out at a club or something. He just was not
Yeah, for
fully
sure.
rested and did not have a great day, apparently.
For sure. And the exact quote from Darko to him was, "Yo, you sucked yesterday," but they were laughing, and Malachi said, "Yeah, I know," and then they sort of laughed and they went over it. Like that's the kind of ability where you're talking about, that soft skills, where you're able to sort of cut to the point, but also like do it in a collaborative way. Because communication was such an important part of sort of what broke down last year, and I think that definitely need a really strong communicator in this case.
Yeah, and he's starting off, I think, and I'm not privy to exactly the level of relationships Nick was building with players. And,
Right.
I think you get an impression talking to some players that, I think if you were Fred or Pascal or, there's a lot of time invested in that relationship. I think elsewhere in the roster, not so much. And I think, I think it's a priority that Darko's made, and you kind of work from the bottom up, and everybody's as important. And I think it allows you, when you do have to, like, these are the facts, right? Like, there's only so many minutes, there's only so many shots, and not everyone's going to get to what they want. In fact, almost no one will, just by definition. Having something that's actual, that the player actually judges as real in terms of that relationship and how that news is delivered, it can really go a long way. And I think that's something that Darko puts a high emphasis on.
So we heard in this story good things from, Malachi Flynn and Chris Boucher, but yeah, he tells me like it is. And that is an important thing that was maybe missing. And again, a lot of this is going to sound, and you even, you pay service to this in the piece that like, hey, a lot of this is going to sound like it's a contrast to Nick Nurse. That's nothing about Nick Nurse. It's just there's a new coach, and of course, it's going to be compared to what is before. So I don't mean it like that. But we hear Malachi Flynn and Chris Boucher talk. We hear Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster talk about what drew them to him. And everyone seems very positive. And there's been a ton of positivity around camp and around the preseason games. And then there's Pascal Siakam, who was not negative, but seems to be, at least to some degree, withholding judgment or just, having gone through this a couple times now, maybe a bit. I think you called him a skeptic in your piece. So this is Pascal Siakam's third coach. He came up under a coach in Dwayne Casey, who was, by the time his tenure there was over, a lot of people revered him for the soft skills side of things, and the X's and O's and things like that. That is part of why the team decided they need to move in another direction. Nick Nurse, kind of a whiplash to that as more of a tactician and a strategist. And now we're back here. When you hear Pascal Siakam talk about this, and you mentioned him and Darko broke bread over the summer, but he wasn't around because of the trade stuff and the contract stuff. Is this the most important part of Darko's kind of first year, that Siakam relationship? Because you could go a couple different ways. You could certainly say Scotty Barnes. You could say it's just winning and moving things in the right direction. But I wonder, Grange, how you feel about how important the Pascal side of things is to Darko's success this year.
Well, I think it's important because it's important to the Raptors' success. And, and it's you can only, as a first-year head coach, and he's not coming in here waving a bunch of rings, like, you only have so much leeway, right? Like you have to have some success. You have to be on the right page with all your players, ideally, but certainly the most important ones. And if things start flying, that's why, I made the point, like, everyone's saying training camp didn't matter, exhibition season. No, I think it really does matter. It did matter, because if Toronto was 0-4 going into tonight's game, and the assist numbers hadn't changed. Nothing had changed. We'd be sitting here going, okay, well, now what? But instead, it looks like you can see the outlines of a plan in terms of how they're going to play.
Yeah.
And similarly with Siakam, his beef in the summer wasn't with Darko.
Yeah.
It was like, why would I go to Summer League and hang out with a team that wants to trade me? No, not doing that. And so, but so you've got a veteran player who's in a very, he's at a kind of a turning point in his career potentially, and not in any bad ways, but change could or could not come. And, so it's a bit more of a challenge, right? Like you are trying to get him to buy in and understand what's good for him is what's good for the team is also good for you. And I think he's done it. My impression is he hasn't kind of tried to overwhelm the situation. They talk, they meet, they communicate. And I would argue that slowly, if you compare some of Pascal's comments the other day to what he was saying at Media Day, I think it's kind of warmed. I think he's kind of, oh yeah, well, I'm willing to keep trying. And, I think that's positive. I think it's a tribute to him, to Pascal, also to Darko. But I think the overall message there from Pascal is, this is always true. If these guys are 10-30, Darko, like I put it this way, if these guys are 10-30, I asked somebody, what's going to happen. He says, well, at least he's not this is Darko. At least he's not a prick, so he might not get prick behavior back.
Okay.
Whereas some coaches are, are just that. And so when things go bad, everything goes bad. And so, but ultimately, you gotta be competitive, good, solid to continue the buy-in they've got so far.
Well, especially when you have so many key free agents, and we can move in that direction with this discussion where Pascal OG, Gary Trent, Precious Achua, and a bunch of veterans or Malachi Flynn's who you don't really, they're not front of mind in free agency. But
Scotty Barnes on a rookie contract.
Yeah, but that one is straightforward to me. Like he's going to get his rookie scale extension.
To you, Blake, when it comes to Raptors extensions or contracts?
I have a deep respect for the collective bargaining agreement and the fact that no good rookie scale extension guy ever leaves. They might demand a trade after the rookie scale extension, but they don't leave.
It's still a decision to be made, that's all.
So Pascal, OG, Gary Trent, like this is some of what you're describing there, Grange, on the downside is manageable if this is, a purely developmental situation. But there's also guys that have like real money on the line here. So, to pivot from the coaching decision, because this is more about the front office to manage than it is just Darko. How comfortable or uncomfortable do you think it is for them right now with, even if it's part of their strategy and they wanted to wait and see, there is so much uncertainty with so many key pieces right now?
I think they're comfortable. I really do. I think if they weren't comfortable, they would have signed Gary to an extension. They would have signed Pascal to an extension or made a real effort, versus none. And I think that they are, I think we've talked about this before, but I think they want to see what this looks like under a new coach. It's kind of like the equivalent of, why did they go and get Jakob at the trade deadline? They wanted to see what this looked like when you had an actual center. And there were some encouraging signs. Now, there was the need for a coaching change. Now you get to see what does this look like in this environment. And it's kind of like this ongoing experiment. Right. And I don't think it's, from Pascal's point of view, I'm sure he doesn't sit there and go, why are you experimenting with me? All I've done is make all NBA. Like, what more do you need to see? But that is the approach they're taking. And I think, if you kind of read their minds a little bit, the way the league is heading towards parity, the restrictions that are coming in the CBA, you got to spend your money really carefully. And you can't just spend it and then hope you can kind of move your way out of whatever deal you find yourself into. And so, I think that they're being very, very cautious shoppers right now. And, I think that they're going to wait and see. Is Scotty, does he emerge as the number one? If he emerges as the number one, can Pascal thrive as the number two? If Scotty's the number one, and kind of the tumble down effects of all these kinds of things.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I think for us, at least it creates more content for us to talk about because all the contracts are locked in. I mean, there'll be less content to talk about. But I guess in general on that subject, I would probably ask both of you, was there any momentum you guys sensed in terms of like getting Precious towards any sort of contract extension? Because I just believe that and I brought this up many times, but there is potential there. I believe in it. I believe in him to be able to reach it. And so if you can lock him into a deal that's a little bit more cost certain, before he breaks out, I would do that.
They would have signed him, but nowhere at a number that Precious would have wanted to sign.
Oh, okay.
So
Interesting.
you know what I mean? So I mean, it's
Right,
basically
okay.
it's like if you look at Precious' body of work
Mhm.
and you're going to say, okay, well, here's
The mid-level. That's why I thought mid-level was good.
I don't even know.
I mean, if you're just looking at what he's done as an NBA player,
Yeah.
he's not a mid-level player. You could have done it, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think the flip side is you got a guy who's saying with gusto that he's one of the best defenders in the league. He
Right.
could be an all NBA defender. So he's not sitting there going, well, why would I sign for the mid-level? So, I think it's a case where, like, if you can achieve these thresholds that you believe you got in you, and as you say, like, I mean, we've all seen it. Like,
We've all seen it for
there's
flashes, for sure.
where this guy, he looks like one of the best 20 players in the league. They're flashes, So if he can have a great year, I think they'll be happy to pay him, and they'll come up with a number that makes them both happy. But I don't think there was a number that would have made Precious happy, or conversely, that would have made the Raptors happy if they'd made Precious happy.
Yeah, I don't have any reporting on it. Just to me, struck me as Precious was a great bet on yourself candidate, especially once we saw some of the deals that came in. And you obviously, you're not negotiating with Precious with the benefit of knowing what everyone else is going to sign for. Like, you don't know that Zeke Naji is going to get 4 years, 32. And so, okay, that's the starting point in negotiations, because Zeke Naji has not been as good as Precious Achiuwa yet, and he's getting $8 million a year. And then Onyeka gets 462. And if you're the Raptors, you're probably looking at that, well, that's absolute ceiling then. You haven't shown nearly as much as Okongwu yet, and he's taking that. And then the band kind of shrinks, and it gets to a spot where if I'm Precious and Precious's camp, I think, like, you're not getting less than 4 years, 32 million if you take this to RFA, and you have to shop yourself elsewhere. So why wouldn't you bet on yourself if the deal being offered isn't significantly higher than that?
Well, I guess the roster hasn't changed. The coach did change. So to kind of go back to the point about Darko, is the front office belief that essentially there's a better way to use this roster in that it can create more of a result? Because that's kind of what they're kind of waiting to see, right? Like, they believe in this talent. They didn't play up to that talent last year, and there must be a different way that Darko wants to do it, whether that's on the court or off the court, that makes it more productive. Is that sort of the general idea?
Yeah, I think that's a totally sound conclusion, right? Like,
Okay.
I mean, if they didn't believe in this talent, they've had lots of opportunities to shop it.
Yeah,
They have
yeah.
shopped it, but they haven't, there hasn't been returns out there. They're
They
interested
window
in it.
shop their own players. It's
It's like-
a very interesting
Right.
way to do it.
But so I think I think that they do believe in what they have. They
Okay.
really do.
All right.
And now it's going to be really fascinating, right? Like Nick Nurse is a really good basketball coach.
Yes, he
Like,
was.
And as much as he was under a lot of fire and all that to an extent last year, I remember vividly him laying out how they were going to play before the season, and they executed that style of play at an extreme level. Like, I mean, they dominated. Like, they were like record-setting possession advantage.
It's
team.
not even close. They had a more than 100 or about 150 extra shooting possessions last year versus their opponent than any other gap in league history.
Yeah, like so he set out to do. We're going to win offensive rebounds. We're going to turn people over. We're going to win in transition. We're going to win because we're going to take 20 more shots than the next guy and our opponent. And that's the best way for this team to win,
Because we can't score in the half court.
because it can't score in the half court. And there were byproducts to all of that. But if you can't say you can't look at all that and go, man, that guy can't coach. No, he did exactly what he said he was going to do. To the extent it worked, that's a different discussion. To the extent it was the only alternative, is a different discussion. And I think that's what this season really is about. I mean, it's not Darko versus Nick, but it is a referendum on this roster. And, like, we've seen it again against poor competition in preseason, but they're one of the highest assist percentage teams in the NBA. They're also one of the highest turnover percentage teams in the NBA. So can they kind of bring one number down and keep one number up and maintain some of that possession advantage they gained defensively? Well, all of a sudden you look like a pretty interesting team.
And if you're forcing fewer turnovers, can you keep up the transition offense, which you need because your half-court offense, even in the preseason, was just okay? There are a lot of questions there. And I'm with you. I think Nick is a very good coach. I think even more so than last year, the 2019-2020 run-it-back season is like they had one of the best defenses adjusting for league average, like the league environment. That was one of the best defensive performances ever for a team, and that was after losing Kawhi and Danny
Right.
Green. Obviously, the bubble reset didn't go quite the way they wanted, but the regular season part of that year was a coaching masterclass.
And I mean, Nick's here on Saturday, right? And you could also throw in there the 48 win year, where they kind of sort of did a lot of the stuff we've just been talking about. But he said, you know what? I'm just going to grind my starters because that's what we need to do. And again, like it's not a mystery with Nick Nurse what he's going to do, when he's going to do it, and how he's going to. But it gets done, and most of the time there's a result. And it's just
sounds like you're describing a dictator.
And look, though, different styles, different coaches, and different styles and different philosophies make sense for different teams at different points, right? Like the Toronto Raptors right now with this roster coming off a 41 win year are not in the same position as the Philadelphia 76ers who get knocked out in the second round every year and absolutely have to have playoff results, and every tiny thing at the margins come playoff time is going to have outsized importance. It's not the same position. You need a different, it's the old Godfather thing of peacetime consigliaries and wartime consigliaries. There's a win now style of coach, and there's a we'd like to win, but we're also taking a bigger picture fit for a coach. So I think it's not just the coaching change. I think there is also Scotty is going to take a bigger step forward than he did last year. I also think the impression I've gotten from the team is that they thought, hey, if this was expectation last year and this is where they actually performed, their underlying metrics or their true talent was somewhere in between. So it hasn't swung all the way to, you're a 36-win team. I think they think they're, a 500-ish team with upside to be significantly more if things click.
Yeah. I mean, I also think the other side of this too is even beyond the wins and losses, like player development just needed to get back on track. And I do wonder if mostly what you're doing is forcing turnovers, offensive rebounding, gambling like crazy, starters play heavy a lot of minutes. Where was the room for player development, right? Obviously, there's going to be some players that can't catch up to that. And if you're trying to grind for those results, you won't have those opportunities. Hopefully, Darko can change that. I mean, obviously, everyone wants to compete and develop. That's like the holy grail of coaching, especially in the NBA. But that is, I guess, the hope that they're trying to go for here with Darko.
Yeah, and like they pulled it off in the bench mob year. Like they were able to serve both of those things, but it's really difficult. Like look around the NBA. There aren't a lot of teams who are winning now, and like the Warriors are trying to thread that needle right now with Moody and Kuminga playing big roles for them while they kind of try to get the last out of this era. It's not a very easy thing to do.
Yeah.
No, it's not. And I think, the other thing that's working in their favor though this year is as we just discussed, Nick Nurse, pretty good coach. I think his message was stale. I think his style had got stale. I think there was a lot of, it's like any relationship over multiple years, kind of.
You have the same fight over and over again.
Old frustrations.
You use the line, I've been here for 10 years. I'm going to have to reevaluate. In public. So.
Yeah.
So, and you're looking for an alignment if you're a front office as well.
Yeah.
And so I think to Darko's advantage, he arrives at a time when being what he is, which seems to be like a real sincere, determined people person, in addition to whatever's technical strengths he needs to have, and I'm sure does have, there's a thirst for that, right? It's like you can kind of be Chris Boucher and go, and Chris was another guy I talked to, and look, I communicated with Nick, but when he came in, he was the young guy under, Kyle and Fred to an extent. Like he was lower on the pecking order, and that never really changed. Like his status maybe in some ways never really elevated, and his relationship with Nick never really evolved, just kind of reading between the lines there. And all of a sudden he, new group comes in, he's all of a sudden a 7-year vet, he's firmly part of the rotation, and the relationship evolves at that level, and he can kind of go, okay, well, now he's routinely in contact with the coach. He does have these kind of communications. And, the coach in turn sees, maybe there's just a little bit more in this guy that can help me just us a little bit more. And so I think that's another good reason why you do go to a new coaching staff, is because you're looking for these small advantages that inevitably kind of, there's only one Popovich, one Eric Spoelstra.
Yeah.
Like there's just
everyone
not
else
many
gets
guys
cycled. It is what it is.
who can, have the juice to kind of have their message, carry, anything over more than 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah. And that's the thing too. Like, even if you look at Philadelphia, for example, another team that was very much in need of a change in terms of who the voice in the locker room was going to be. and then you go to Nick, and everyone's really happy and signing there. And of course, like that's the thing with coaches, like it's just natural. It's part of the job. Part of your job is that it built into the function of your job is that eventually you get fired so that you have a new change and a new voice in there. So
that's why every coach, no matter the situation, there's a contract extension talk. You're on rolling 3 and 5 year deals that hey, once 1 year is gone off of that, it's like extension.
Yeah, well, that's how you got to Monty Williams making the mid-level exception, which good for Monty and good for Greg Popovich. I think the both of them are making the same money. Okay, obviously the small advantages are important. The big advantage, though, for the Raptors, if there is going to be one, is how much is Scottie Barnes going to level up from last year, right? Because when you talk about player development, it's a big phrase. It could encompass almost anybody. Technically, Thad Young can improve from year 17 to 18 or whatever, but obviously the biggest thing is Scottie Barnes, and so much of this rides on that. I guess, Grange, I'm just asking you, like, what have you seen from it so far in preseason? Because to me, it looks like he's done that. He has made that jump.
Yeah, I mean, he looks great. Like, I don't think we have to get too overly analytical about it. I mean, I think his per 36 numbers are like 30, 10, and 10 or some crazy,
great.
And he's shooting 50% from 3. I mean, if his 3-point shooting, he's shooting 50% for 3 over the course of a month. That's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also say, Will, you've been around there for a bit, Blake a little bit as well, and he does seem to have a little different energy about him. Like he's not. He's leaning more into being an experienced NBA player than being kind of a young, goofy guy. And I think last year, these guys are always really smart, like he's capable of looking back at last year and going, okay, well, that didn't go exactly as I wanted. Why?
Right.
And adjusting. Right.
Yeah, of course.
And I can only assume without knowing that that's exactly what has happened in the past year. It is worth pointing out that he came in. I remember last year in training camp at one point, Nick said, well, he missed the whole month of August. Well, with what? Oh, because he blew his ankle out. Okay, well, maybe somebody should mention that.
Right.
And so the ramp up to last year was not good. And
Sure.
And I think it really was a setback for him, among other maybe, I don't want to say challenges, but like second year experiences he's having. And so, I think he's healthy. He looks great. He ran in the offseason, as we discussed.
A lot of running.
I mean, this is a Scotty talking point, right? This isn't us being like, this is going to come up with the Blue Jays this coming year of like, oh, conditioning. But like Scotty is leading the charge on the like, I really focused on my conditioning, added more muscle, ran a lot more. Like I'm going to be way better suited to.
I just think it's funny that
35
an NBA
minutes.
player, though, it occurs to him that running would be good. I'm like, okay, good. Well, that's experience for you.
The funny thing with the conditioning,
but I mean, shortly, I just think the guy you're going to see this year, can he be the guy that they absolutely need him to be? It doesn't mean he's going to get there. Like, it's a lot to ask in year 3, but
that's the ask, though. That is the ask.
Well, I think he's at least got to show at some point. We'll be sitting here talking, going, man, this guy, I don't know if he's all-star this year based on the math, but he's going to be. I don't know if he's all-NBA this year based on the math, but he's going to be. Like, you have to kind of have a 10, 20 game, 30 game stretch where you're going, oh, okay, this is the real deal. And, like I've seen minutes of it in the regular season in the preseason, but that's what you need to see. It doesn't have to all happen all at once.
Sure,
but there's got to be some moments in there where you're going, okay, this guy's the real deal.
Is that for you, Michael? Given what we know defensively, and like any young guy is going to be up and down, the Raptors have a whole bunch of good individual defenders. We know what Scotty can look like in transition. How much of this for you comes down to his ability to maybe not necessarily one-on-one, but get buckets in the half court for this team? We saw him do it in a small-ish sample in the clutch really well last year. When you're evaluating that specific point of like, hey, where is there the upside here for him to be an unquestioned number 1 guy by year 4 or by year 5? How much of that comes down to just his ability to get a bucket in the half court?
I mean, it's obviously important. It doesn't have to be his best thing. Like, there's different ways to be an all-NBA player. There's different ways to be an all-star. So, if he's outing guys and, beating, splitting double teams, like, okay, that'd be great. But, I don't know if that's necessarily going to be him. But I think for me, a bigger swing skill is, can he be a passable / reliable / good catch and shoot guy? I think that really just makes life easier for everybody around him. And, because if he's your second side guy, because he's he can station himself in the far corner, far wing, and really be a threat. All of a sudden, if he's attacking a second side defense at his size, speed, finishing ability, that's like good luck. I mean, I'm sorry, that's going to be very unsuccessful for the defense.
It also speaks to his ability to have a long-term offensive fit with Pascal Siakam as well.
Right. So I guess to what you're saying, I don't think that there's got to be a huge need for him to kind of catch it with 8 seconds of the clock, high, at the wing, and let the clock bounce and and break people down.
Yeah,
like it'd be nice once in a while.
That's just not his game.
Certainly against a mismatch, he can just. I think his most reliable is just overpower guys and get to the rim. But but I think for me, if he's a weak side 3-point threat who can then in turn attack closeouts on the second side, I mean, I think that would make a big difference.
He's such a good cutter too, that being on the weak side, the amount you could sneak in on the baseline or crash, do the kind of Grady Dick sneaky crash the offensive glass when everyone's body turns the other way. And
did you guys catch Darko saying he thought Scotty's going to be Defensive Player of the Year one day?
That was great.
Yeah. So how many Defensive Player of the Years do the Raptors have right now?
OG should have had one by now.
Dynasty.
Precious Achiuwa thinks he's already a top 5 1 through 5 defender. Scotty's going to get one day. Pascal has gotten all defense votes before.
Yeah.
So this team,
Jakob might have the best metrics.
At some point, they've got to mesh defensively. Maybe that's the problem. They're too selfish defensively.
I really do. They finished 14th defensively last year, which was like wildly disappointing given the talent. And that's probably the biggest signal that the kind of super aggressive style had gone too far the other way. And like the super aggressive style wasn't just about creating turnovers. Initially, it was like, well, we don't have rim protection, so we have to make it really uncomfortable to get into spaces and kind of wall off the paint that way. And then last year, it was just a parade to the rim and the free throw line. So yeah, I think defensively, this like they better be a top 10 defense, and I think they probably have top 5 upside.
Yeah. I mean, I remember talking to an assistant coach last year for another team, and I say, so what's going on here? He goes, well, they don't run anything. And if you don't turn it over, like, who are you scared of? And they're like, oh, okay.
That's a hell of a scouting report.
Actually, I'm putting together 2 different conversations. One guy said, yeah, no, they don't run anything. And the other guy was like, well, if you do turn the corner, why would you stop? And, so I think they, but I mean, based on personnel and based on people's perception of their own ability,
right,
they should be a really good defensive team.
If you have 5 all-defense guys and your defense isn't top 10, I'm going to question
they have 3 All-NBA.
Yeah.
They have 3 Defensive Player of the Year.
Yes. Right. You're going to sweep the podium in Defensive Player of the Year voting.
I mean, I'm expecting the Raptors on defense to be like China in ping pong. Like, we'll be first, second, and third in singles and doubles. Yeah, I mean, I think the last thing we really wanted to touch on, just to sort of change to the opponent, because that's what we're going to do for the last segment after the break, is just look a little bit about the Wolves. They got 2 really, really talented Canadians on that squad, Leonard Miller and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Honestly, Grange, a little surprised Leonard Miller dropped to 33. Like, he was a projected, like, late lottery kind of guy.
Yeah, I mean, Liban Osman had a nice story on this in the Star today, and I think it was a combination of short answer, surprise. I mean, this guy, it's a very, very, it's kind of a shadow of like the whole Luka Doncic thing in kind of miniature, where Luka Doncic was the best player in the world outside the NBA and the best league outside the NBA, and somehow he wasn't the number 1 pick. Like, people overthought it. Here you have a teenager, a very raw teenager, based on his whole entire playing experience, making a really impressive, like, ramp up in the G League, which is a really good league, better than any college league, and yet somehow that didn't earn him the kind of respect required to be a first-round pick. But
also, weirdly, it did earn Scoot the respect, but not Miller necessarily.
Scoot didn't have as great a year last year.
No, I mean, he was still tremendously fun. He was like the most electrifying guy we've ever seen in the G League. It was awesome for G League people. But yeah, like Leonard Miller was the guy who you came away, but certainly not thinking he should be as high as Scoot in the draft, but like really impressed with.
But like Scoot's year over year wasn't what people were looking for yet. Granted, he's still Scoot. So yeah, I was a little surprised, I guess, just to read Lee's piece. I mean, was he shut down because they wanted to protect him a little bit? Did he have an injury? I don't know. But there's a lot of volatility in that kind of once you're outside that top 10, 12, anything can happen.
It's potentially a nice spot too, where Minnesota's talked about like, yeah, he's going to be down with the Iowa Wolves. He's going to get some more G League time. We don't need him to contribute to the rotation too much right away, so they can, rather than landing in a spot where either there's no plan in place for you at all. There's a little bit of a blend here of they can be patient, and then there is a path to a role.
He's played 1 year of big time basketball.
Yeah.
He played in the SBA up here, or OBA or OSBA, sorry, for Fort Erie, and that's a good high school league. That was his, because his path is very interesting. I mean, he went down to the States, he got hurt, there was COVID. He ended up on a team. He had moved to another team. He got buried because the team was too good for him at that time. So he comes back to Ontario and has a huge year for Fort Erie. But like that's still high school, Canadian high school basketball. It's not, he's not at Montverde, and then to go from there and so last year in the G League, that's really his first real structured 24/7 basketball experience.
And the Ignite play a short schedule.
And they play a short schedule, but and if you saw Leonard Miller, as I'm sure you did, at the Global Jam,
yes, we
the
did.
summer before he turned pro, like he didn't look like. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. He was
not
impressive.
an NBA player.
No,
he wasn't
not in
close.
the moment. But
and so jumped. I think what's really cool for him is, he needs a lot more room to grow,
right.
and I think he's still a very raw prospect, but he's proven that he's got the tools, he's got the aptitude, the attitude. And so I think him going to a strong team like Minnesota, a deep team, I think it's a good situation to kind of slow play his growth.
Right. And, we've kind of run out of time to talk about Nikhil, but the only thing I'll say with him is just always believed he was really talented, and it seems like he's really found a home in Minnesota. And I think he just needs more of an opportunity to showcase what he's got. But it seems like he's got a coach that really believes in him. There, but we have to take a quick break and say goodbye to Michael Grange. Thank you so much. We're going to let you go down to the arena. I've been your host, Will Lou, and you've been listening to The Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. When we come back, we'll talk about this game tonight.